Remember when I compared US to UK covers? Well, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to use books compiled by Ash from Ash's Infinite Library. She's a book blogger, and I'll have a link to her fantastic blog below. But she did this little game where she compared the US versus UK covers, and I wanted to play along as well. And who am I, you may ask? I am the BookTube goddess, the #1 drag queen booktuber on YouTube. So we're going to see two covers, one cover from the US and one cover from the UK, and I'm going to say which cover I like the most. I'm not going to have any ties. It's either going to be the US or UK. But the last time I played this, we ended up tallying the scores. I picked 10 US and 10 UK. So we are kind of at a tie already. But let's see this next batch of covers that Ash has compiled. Okay, first up is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I haven't read this, but I've heard good things about it. Just looking at the covers, though, the US is... I don't like either of these covers that much, but it's black with some gold keys and the Starless Sea. The UK version, for some reason, looks much more retro, and it has a bumblebee on the cover. I guess that has something to do with the book. I guess that's supposed to be a blue sea behind it, but it looks more like marble grain, so... Of these two covers, I'm going to have to give it to the US. Next we have Call Down the Hawk by Maggie Steve Vader. And the covers are very similar. They're both having this hawk flying down, I guess, to grab something. The US version, you can't see much details of the hawk, and it looks like it's flying through some fire. Gives me a phoenix vibe. In the UK version, there still is that phoenix vibe. You see some flames on its wings, and you see flames coming out of its eyes. But in its wings, you see sort of this silhouette of a forest as well. I think that's a lot cooler than the US version, so I'm going to give it to the UK. Next up, The Bear in the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. And, the US version gives me sort of a ghost story vibe, a cabin in the woods. I would even think this could be a horror novel. And on the UK side, it's totally a different vibe. It could be a romance or contemporary fiction or literary fiction. I have these two. I'm going to have to give it to the UK again because it's the US version, something seems a little bit generic about it, but the UK version seems more unique. And I like sort of the illustrated quality of the flower with the nightingale on it against a starry sky. So, UK. Next up is The Immortalist by Chloe Benjamin. The US version has sort of this colorful tree with, looks like fall colors, and The Immortalist in sort of a basic font. The UK version has a much more retro feel. It almost looks like a faded poster with The Immortalist in sort of that slanted font and a little blurb on the cover. I kind of like the UK version more than this one. The US version just seems pretty plain to me. Okay, I don't know what's happening. I'll pick 3 UK and only 1 US. Okay, next one, Wayward Son by Rainbow Roll. And I've yet to read a Rainbow Roll book, but I do think the covers are very recognizable. Like at least the US version, whenever I see that type of illustration, I think of Rainbow Roll. Obviously they have the name in front and center. The UK version, I'm assuming, is just a similar artist, but in different poses. So, I think just as character studies, the UK version is more interesting with that guy with the flowered suit. And I guess this is like angel and devil or devil and human. But the US version has a better composition, and I see the author's name and the title seems to stand out more. And since they have a more interesting pose rather than just standing side by side, I'm going to give it to the US. Next up is The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary. And gosh, this isn't the type of book I would normally pick up, so I'm not that familiar with this type of cover. But the US version actually has people in it, which I find more interesting, except I'm not a big fan of font that sort of goes in that that vertical direction. The UK version is pretty boring. The flat share just has this basic bluish green background, and I guess it's a bed with coffee cups on either side. It looks pretty boring to me, so even though in the US I don't like that font running in that direction, I'm going to have to give it to the US. Next up is The Lies of Loch Lamore by Scott Lynch. I love this series of books. If you like sort of dark fantasy, if you like adventures with heists, like with Six of Crows, I think Lies of Loch Lamore is much better. Highly recommend, but we're just looking at the covers. So the US version is the one I'm most familiar with. It has sort of that fantasy painting with the title in red font. And the UK version is very similar, except it's green and the illustration just seems to take up most of the top half. And the UK version has an actual figure of a person sitting on a post, and I like seeing the person in that illustration. I do love the US illustration though too. In the UK version, I wish there were two figures that you could see rather than just that one. I guess that's Loch Lamora. The US version I think is gorgeous, but gosh, if I'm being honest, I think I'm going to give it to the UK version because I think that green expanse really does set apart the title and the author's name, and the illustration itself is pretty interesting, but that figure on a post really, I think, puts it over the edge, so I'm going to give it to the UK. Next up is Station 11 by Emily St. Mandel. Now, I have not read this. I tried getting into the HBO series. I really loved the first one or two episodes, but then it sort of lost me. So it's a post-apocalyptic sort of survival story. Okay, in the US version, there are tents set up, and I know the story features a Shakespearean acting troupe, so I think that's what they're going for, that encampment. The UK version is more of a black and white illustration with a deer in sort of a city landscape, and there's vines crawling up a lamppost. I'm getting more of what the story is about in the UK version. The US version, although that's part of the story, that doesn't happen later, so it's not really telling you it's post-apocalyptic. But honestly, I think I just like the composition of the UK version, especially with that pink font that sort of pops out the title. So I'm going to give it to the UK. And so far, I've picked 5 UK and 3 US. I don't know what's going on. Okay, this is another book that I have read, City of Ghosts by Victoria Schwab. It's a middle grade ghost story, and the main title character is some sort of ghost hunter that she can see ghosts. It wasn't my favorite middle grade ghost story, even though I like this author and other things she's done. But I do love the cover of the US version, and I should say that because I picked it for Shelve It or Shove It, because I love that city in the background, and I love seeing that little cat and the girl. The UK version seems to be harder. It's the US version sort of fuzzy and ghost-like. The UK version, the characters seem to be very crisp, the character and her cat, and there's like people in sort of dark red silhouette around this city landscape. So I'm going to still give this one to the US. Next up is Normal People by Sally Rooney. And the covers are so similar. The only difference is the US version has 2 people, and the UK version has a can of sardines. And I say they're similar because the font looks similar, the color choices seem similar. However, I'm going to have to give it to the UK because I'm more intrigued with that sardine can because it looks like there's people in it. To recap, so far I've picked 6 UK and 4 US. And our next batch starts with Ham Net by Maggie O'Farrell. The US version looks very bizarre. It has this sort of painting of a young man with a feather over his eyes and sort of a very old-fashioned looking font and design to this. And the UK version has, I guess, the H of Hamnet emphasized as pillars with leaves around it. I am much more intrigued with what's going on with the US cover, so US for Hamnet. Next up is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, who's also Victoria Schwab, who did The City of Ghosts. Anyway, I love this book. This was my pick for top book of 2020, and the cover is okay in the US version. The big standout, of course, is you can see the constellation of 7 stars. It's also a birthmark or something on Addie LaRue, the woman who no one can see. And the UK version, I guess the stars are still there, but it's not really clear that it's a constellation. It has this blue motif with blue flowers. I think I'm going to have to give it to the US because I don't think the UK version really captures what the book's about. I don't get this color choice and the flowers and the little lines. I sort of like the simplicity in this case for the US cover. So, US. Next up is The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. Both covers are similar, but yet they're not. They both have sort of these cutouts and shapes and sort of color blocking, but there's 2 figures in both. I think the figures in the UK are easier to see. The US is much more abstract. Oh, this is really tough though. I sort of like the colors in the US more because they're more vibrant and they catch my attention more. Even though the UK, I can see the people better. I still can't get what this novel is about by either cover, but I think just by how it grabs you, I'm going to have to go with the US. Okay, the US is just pulled ahead. 7 picks for the US and 6 for the UK. Okay, next up is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. And I do recall seeing this for Shelve It or Shove It, the US version, with sort of the airplane windows, and there's little illustrations of people and planes and books and things going through the window. There's a whale. I think that's all very interesting. The UK version has none of that. It just has looks like a cutout of a building, and there's a little cat walking up to the building. I'm a big sucker for cats, so I like that. It says One Library, Infinite Lives. I'm going to have to give it to the US because I think that is just more interesting. There's more going on and more things I'm wondering about this book that's going to make me want to pick it up. Next up, it's Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. And the US version, there's 2 planes hitting each other and there's 2 people side by side. And in the UK version, there's just 2 people side by side, just split by 2 different colors. Now, even though I like the images of the people better on the UK side, in the US version, I'm getting more of what the story's about. The planes, I don't think that's 2 planes colliding, but maybe you have to visit each other by plane because in the background of the person on the right, it looks like a green field, and the background in the person on the left looks like a city firescape, so country mouse, city mouse type of situation. So I'm getting more of what the story's about for the US. So I'm going to give it to the US. Okay, I don't know what's happening. The US just has really pulled ahead. 9 books for the US and just 6 books for the UK. Okay, next up is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Now, what I think is really interesting about this is it looks like the exact same artist drew this, except drawing Evelyn Hugo in 2 different poses. Now, I haven't read this book before, but I've heard so much about it that I am curious to pick it up at some point. Isn't it about Elizabeth Taylor? Not about her, but sort of inspired by Elizabeth Taylor, an old-time movie star with lots of husbands. So the only question is really, the font's different, but I can read them both. Well, which pose do I like? Do I like the sort of laid-back glamour girl look, or the sort of more poised standing figure of the UK? I have to say that I like the US version better. I sort of like that more dynamic pose of the glamour girl doing sort of a photo shoot shot, rather than just the person standing and looking at something. I do like both of them have their faces cut off. They just focused on the dress. Okay, but giving it to the US. Next up is If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha. Now, in the US version, obviously there's an Asian woman with the font cutouts in front of her, and sort of this fall yellow, reddish orange theme. In the UK version, it's much more weirder. There's all sorts of cutouts of a person's face and flowers, and it's very strange. I wish we could tell the person was Asian more in the UK version, but since I'm assuming the US version has an Asian woman on the cover, it's about an Asian woman. But nonetheless, I'm going to give it to the UK because that is much more interesting. I would definitely pick up the UK version over the US version. Next up is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. In the US version, looks like, well, it has that sort of cursive script and a skull, and definitely get horror vibes. In the UK version, we have a dead bird. What? I'm going to have to give it to the UK. The US looks more like a generic cover. The UK, I'm asking all sorts of questions because there is a dead bird on the cover. Next up is The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell. And these covers look more different than I think anything we've seen before. The US version has some sort of, I don't know, looks like a target almost against a sky. Is that the Earth in the center? In the UK version, though, we have a golden apple. If you know the Legend of Eris, you know what that apple stands for. And you have this weird illustration of this, what is it, a spoon of water holding up the apple, and there's birds flying from it. There's a pocket watch. I am much more interested in the UK version. I have no idea what's going on with the US version, but the UK version, I have some questions. That's going to make me want to pick up that book. I actually like this cover a lot, so of course it's going to the UK. Next up is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I've been wanting to read this book as an audiobook for a long time because I hear so many great things about the audiobook. Anyway, now this is hard because the covers look almost identical. They have that red string in both of them. In the US version, though, they're sort of cutouts of words. That's not in the UK version, but the UK version's easier to read. So I'm going to have to say the US. It gives me a little bit more interest with those cutout words. Next up is City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert. And the US version looks like there are ostrich feathers. I wish I could afford ostrich feathers, but there's some pink ostrich feathers, which are usually associated with like Vegas showgirls. And in the UK version, it looks like there's some sort of boa as well, feather boa with a illustration of a woman's head peeking out behind it. So I guess it's a story about showgirls. Maybe it's about Las Vegas. I live in Las Vegas. But of these two covers, I think I'm going to give it to the UK because I sort of like that illustration with the woman's head peeking out. The US version just looks kind of muddy to me. Okay, so the score is 11 for the US and 10 for the UK. We're at the last book. If this goes to the UK, it's going to be another tie. So we are going to look at My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. In the US version, there is sort of this black and white photorealistic photo of a girl holding her hand to an eye, and there's, I guess, a moth or a butterfly over it. And in the UK version, we just see a fall of ginger hair with the words My Dark Vanessa sort of peeking out through it. There's sort of a peach color on the background of the cover. And there's a pop of color on the fonts, at least with the word Vanessa. And it's kind of an interesting sky blue. It's not really green blue, but I'm going to call it sky blue, dark sky blue. Anyway, that kind of makes things pop. And the US version, it's kind of interesting, but these dark photorealistic covers, I'm not drawn to them. They're just kind of, I don't want to say depressing, but they're dark. I really wish there was a pop of color. Maybe if that butterfly or moth was a bright color, that would make you draw into that cover more. As it is, I'm going to have to say the UK. So we ended up with another tie, 11 books to 11 books. That is so crazy. So let me know down in the comments if you agreed or disagreed with me, or which covers you liked a lot or which covers you really didn't like. While you're there, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. By the way, every month I add to my TBR at least one book just based purely on the cover in a series I call Shelve It or Shove It. If you want to see an episode, there's one right here. Until we meet again, may all the books you read be blessed.